as to how many study groups, work groups, commissions are. So we will deal with them, but not today, and I'm not sure about Friday. So that's where we are generally. We passed a bill on Friday, the Senate President's bill, and we added some amendments to it. And I believe there's a motion for reconsideration. Senator Simon-Ayer moves to reconsider, and there's a second from Senator Riley. Anybody object to the reconsideration of that bill for the purpose of redoing some amendments? Any objection? Okay, the bill is before us. So this is the bill that talks about the makeup of the State Board of Education, right? I just want to put people back in the frame here, frame of mind. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The committee voted to put in the boilerplate language about geography and gender, and the other lists that Stacy had pulled elsewhere. We then got ambitious and put in LGBTQ, and we put in religion, and apparently those were a bridge too far. And while they're well-intentioned and while they are included in some other places, this isn't the right place in case someone isn't willing to share that information. We don't want to make that required or awkward in any way. So I would like to move that we go with the regular boilerplate language and remove the sexual orientation and religion that we had proposed adding.
Is there a second? Second discussion? Anybody object? Okay, then we're back in the not original posture, but the posture after the First Amendment. Discussion on the bill? Will anybody be voting no on the bill? Okay, it'll get a recommendation to the floor on the Senate President's bill. Now back to Senator Riley. You had a motion on number 20.
Thank you. Voting list number 23, bills withdrawn. Move unfavorable.
Is there a second? Second. Any discussion? Will anybody be voting against the unfavorable on the withdrawn bills? Seeing none, they are unfavorable and they are withdrawn. Yes.
Exactly. I missed that. What just happened? Could you?
Yeah.
I just missed. I apologize.
The sponsor of these three bills sent a letter saying they'd like to be withdrawn.
Okay. And that's voting list number
20.
20. Oh, I found it. Okay, great.
And then
thank you.
That still means unfavorable, so it was a motion unfavorable.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. I think we owe it to do the ones we've postponed. List 21, is that right, Council?
Some of them.
Oh.
So 525, 632, those are holdovers.
Okay, let's see how far we can. We'll start with 19. We'll hopefully get through all of them. I'm going to try the packet here. Okay, we're on 19. So we'll start from the top. Senate Bill 66.
Okay, Senate Bill 66, Department of Housing and Community Development, Office of Digital Inclusion, established Digital Connectivity Act of 2021. We passed this bill favorably. It went on to B&T, but we passed it with amendments. B&T approved all of those amendments and adopted additional. So now the current posture is that we have to decide on B&T's amendments. So to catch everyone up to speed, what SB 66 essentially does is it replaces the Office of Rural Broadband with the Office of Digital Inclusion. The office is tasked with preparing a statewide plan to ensure that every member of the state, every citizen, has reliable broadband internet by a specified date. Outlines responsibilities of the office. The amendments establish three funds: Digital Inclusion, Digital Connectivity, Rural Broadband Assistance Fund.
What page, Alexis, are the amendments,
looking
the
at
new
something
amendments
different.
from B&T?
So the new amendments begin on page 3. And so essentially, kind of sum them up here. What these new amendments from B&T will do, they'll add the role of the office in respect to partnerships with local jurisdictions. So it's not a material distinction, but a new responsibility will be to anchor institutions of the private sector to assist local jurisdictions in library systems with planning, designing, and constructing broadband infrastructure. One of the funds, the Rural Broadband Assistance Fund, is now moved under the jurisdiction of DHCD, Department of Housing and Community Development instead of Commerce where it was. This doesn't affect at all the amendments that we passed where we placed the funds back, or the interest in the fund back into those specified funds. And everything else remains the same. So we have movement of a fund and an additional role that will task the office with assisting at the local level with planning, designing, and constructing broadband infrastructure. And these amendments have been approved by Rural Maryland.
Okay, so our first task, since you've already moved the bill, is to take up and either affirm the B&T amendments and then move the bill out as amended. They accepted our amendments and added a few others. Is there a motion? It's moved and seconded. Any discussion on adopting the B&T amendment? Senator Ellis.
Quick question, Ms. Foxworth. Moving the rural broadband to the Department of Housing and Community Development, does that affect the funding for rural broadband? As far as, will money shift? Is there any case from commitment to rural broadband to maybe elsewhere?
It's just, it'll be a complete shift, right? So it was in Commerce, and now it's going into another pot. So it's not going to affect anything pre-existing because it's a complete transition. So all of the funds that would have gone to Commerce are going to go into this new one. So nothing pre-existing is going to be affected.
Yeah, so will there be I'm concerned there'll be I don't understand what you're saying, a dilution of the monies available for the rural broadband build out. Now it's going from rural areas, seem like this bill will make it urban, suburban, whatever, everywhere in Maryland. So.
Oh, okay. I think I get it. I think so. The focus of the fund will be the same. It's just a matter of who's administering it. So the priorities of the fund, who the money goes to assist and support, will completely be the same. Rural areas, underrepresented areas, getting that access to broadband. That's going to be the same. Just a matter of who's going to administer it. So that's the key distinction here.
Yeah. Okay. I understand what you're saying. Let me stew on that for a bit and see if I can have another question later. But go ahead, Mr. Chairman.
If you have a question, ask it, Senator.
Yeah. Well, it's more the changes. I'm not. Of course, I can't go through it now. I have to see the impact on the rural community. As you know, my district have a large rural component, and so do other members here. And so I would just love to do due diligence, and it's impossible for me to digest the amendments sitting here right now to have an informed vote. And so maybe the discussion will help me digest it. If not, we'll see what I can do.
That's fair. Senator Riley, then Senator Hester, then Senator Simon-Air.
Thank you very much.
So the more we can illuminate while we're talking and answer any questions the senator might have.
Sure. I think the question is, does the level of funding change?
So no, the only thing that we shifted was the placement and the administration of it, but we didn't, thanks for that. We didn't alter any types of money that's coming in, money that's going out. It's just a simple matter of what branch, what department, what entity will house the fund.
I just wanted to add that, I view this as an expansion of the entire pie. So the fund will be moved to be in the new office. And the previous office only had like one person. And I think this new office will have this plus other funds. It'll just be more people working and more funds available to get broadband to the rural counties, but also to some of the underserved urban counties.
Thank you. Council, I know before the House was working trying to keep these two together, and they had the same amendments, and then somebody held it, and then now we have B and T. Can you tell me where we are in the posture with the two, if you know?
So as soon as we make a decision, these bills or the amendments that we adopt or don't adopt today will be sent to them. So I think they're hoping to pass something that is identical to what we do on this side.
Senator, I'd like to move the bill unless you object, and I'll hear your objection. I might not accede to it. But the motion is to adopt the B and T amendments. Senator Ellis.
Well, could I have a day hold to read over the amendments? I know your position, but this really affects my district a lot, and I understand the discussion, and a lot of times that I digest it really quick. I'll stay up late tonight, promise, and read it. And
We'll put it on for Friday.
okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well, or tomorrow. If we
Yeah.
have a voting session tomorrow, it'll be tomorrow.
Yeah.
The next voting session.
Next one. Okay, thank you.
Next bill, please. 85.
All right, Senate Bill 85, creating Governor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, sponsored by Senator Rosa Pepp. The bill creates the Governor's Office of Immigrant Affairs to provide services to immigrants. It outlines the responsibilities of the office, leadership, and duties of said office. There's a reporting mandate within the bill whereby the director of the office has to report to the governor and the General Assembly every year on activities within the office. There was opposition by private citizens, and there is one amendment. The purpose of the amendment is to clarify that there is no mandatory appropriation within the bill and that the funding of the office is based on available funds within the budget. That is on, trying to find what page those amendments start. Thank you.
Senator Gallion? Okay, it's been moved. Is there a second? Discussion.
Sure. So, we talked earlier about, the amount of bills and things and moving things through and what's going to take more time on the floor. And we know if there's a debate on status as far as legal versus undocumented and all that, it's just going to drag this way out. So I think at this time, in the best interest of time, is just to maybe bring this one back another year.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Foxworth, can you just tell us, in the assumption that there's no money available, which is what you said, that it can still exist, and if money's there, great, and all this stuff, do we have any information or do you have any ideas as to what could be done or how they could launch if there's no money available? What sort of services they might provide? Do we have that?
based off of funds that have already been allocated. And I'm taking a look at the fiscal note now, Senator Kagan, to see how they made those distinctions or where the money was coming from.
Further discussion? Well, I'll just say for myself, immigration is an issue, and I don't think we're defining all of the things that are included or excluded, but having a central clearinghouse for addressing the issue and maybe surfacing issues that might come to us or come back to us is somewhat relevant. I think having an Office of Immigration that reports to the governor with recommendations or whatever can only help but benefit. Any recommendations that change policy in the state would have to come to the legislature. So I think it's a good idea. I think I understand. I'm sympathetic that we don't want to have a long debate on this, but I think under the governor, and I think the governor will know how to utilize this office with limited money and limited resources to start to have a voice and a clearinghouse for that part of the population, I think benefits the state. So I'm going to be voting for. I'm going to be voting against the unfavorable, whatever it's worth. Further discussion? If not, we'll go to a roll call vote. Yes, Senator.
And I apologize, I haven't read all the language here. A lot of this sounds like something the federal government would be doing. I mean, we're going to be setting up Maryland to assist in matters related to immigration status, naturalization process. I mean, that sounds like a federal requirement. I don't know why the state wouldn't just refer them to federal. I don't know why we're duplicating government. So I'll support the motion.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. To address the comment from the senator from District 31, would be similar to the Maryland Department of Veterans Affairs. So we have the Federal Department for Veterans Affairs, which take care of the payment to veterans, pension, retirement, disability, health care. They do the bulk of it. The Maryland Department of Veterans Affairs assists veterans, state veterans, in getting those federal benefits, which is a benefit to Maryland. So thinking of that model, this would fit right into that particular program. It's just assisting our citizens here in Maryland who are here to help them, navigate the system and have a better life in Maryland.
The key thing there is you said they're citizens of Maryland. They're not. It specifically says that in the bill on page 2. It says they are not citizens of the United States and whose country of origin is other than the United States. So these are people that have come here maybe on a green card or something, or may have come here unlawfully, and they're going to be setting an office up to help them. I don't think it's quite like the example you explained, but I understand the analogy.
So I didn't say citizens of the United States. I said citizens of Maryland. Maybe I should say residents of Maryland. Okay, so I stand corrected.
The motion is an unfavorable, well, we didn't do the amendment.
On the amendment.
Well, no, the unfavorable is on the bill, correct? If that is defeated, we'll come back and add the amendment. So the motion is unfavorable on Senate Bill 85. Roll call. There was an amendment mentioned that makes it explicit it's not a mandatory appropriation. Is that in our packet?
Going to clarify when this microphone turned on, a response to Senator Kagan's question. So as it stands now, we're looking at 300,000 fiscal impact, right? And from my knowledge and my vantage point, I'm not sure if there's a way to circumvent that cost. However, the intent of the amendment is to clarify that nothing in this bill suggests that funding has to be mandated by next fiscal year or before next fiscal year. So the point of it is to clarify that. So
Where's the amendment, Ms. Foxworth?
let me find the page. Yeah, thank you. I just had it up. Page 32 of our voting packet.
It's under my name. I move the amendment. It's been moved and seconded. Discussion. Anybody? Sure. Objection to the amendment. Okay, the amendment's adopted. The bill as amended, further discussion? If not, we'll do a roll call. Yes.
Favorable. Aye.
Bill passes 7-4 for those listening in on our session. Let's go to Senate Bill 379, Senator Lamb, Health Occupations, Audiology Assistance.
This bill requires the Board of Examiners for audiologists, hearing aid dispensers, and speech-language pathologists to register audiology assistants on or before October 1st of 2022. It allows the board to establish regulations for said registration. The bill permits registration exemption for certain audiology assistants that are licensed or registered in another state, so long as they have applied for registration within our state. The bill establishes registration requirements, and prohibited acts, including prohibiting a person from using several terms to indicate their competence in the field unless they are registered. Requires audiology assistants to work under the supervision of audiologists, although a supervisor need not be present throughout the duration of services that they're performing. And finally, it allows the board to discipline those who supervise unauthorized persons. There was no opposition to the bill. There is an amendment within the packet starting on page 33. And essentially, this changes the term registration to licensing to be in alignment with other health occupations. So everywhere where registration is mentioned, even in the title, we're changing it to licensing. It permits the licensure, then, consequently, of audiology assistants as opposed to registration of them. It aids or adds hearing aid technicians and cochlear implant technicians to the terms a person is prohibited from using to indicate competence unless they are licensed under this scheme.
Let's put the bill in front of us. Is there a motion favorable? It's been moved favorable, seconded. And let's move the amendment on the floor and have a second on that as well. Then we'll go to debate. Madam Vice Chair.
Oh, on the amendment, yeah, you got that. I just have a question for the sponsor of the bill. In the fiscal note, it talks about demonstrate oral competency, and maybe this is a question for Ms. Foxworth. Is that defined in the law? And while you're looking, I can just tell you the reason for my question. Is that implied that it's in English? And the reason that I ask that is maybe I want to set up a practice as an audiologist assistant that serves the Latino community or something, and would that be okay? I just want to make sure that we're not excluding somebody who has oral competency but in another language or something. Maybe you can just fill us in.
Sure. So oral competency isn't defined or clarified in any way within health occupations. So
Okay, so it's basically just the ability to speak, and there's no further definition of that.
right.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Discussion on the amendment. Any objection to the amendment? Going from registration to licensing. Seeing no red lights on, we've adopted that amendment. The bill is amended. It's open for discussion. Seeing none, will anybody be voting against it? We can record your vote. Seeing not, 11-0 on Senate Bill 379. Is that right? Yep, 379. Thank you, and next bill, please.
Senate Bill 439, Public Institutions of Higher Education, Student Athletes, the Jordan McNair Safe and Fair Play Act. This bill establishes a number of requirements regarding college student athletes at public four-year institutions of higher education. In general, the bill establishes a requirement for 5-year scholarships for student athletes, as specified, a requirement for financial and life skills workshops, that student athletes must be granted the same rights as other students as specified, and a requirement for a notice detailing student athletes' rights, requirements related to student athletes transferring institutions, requirements related to health care for student athletes, requirements for the adoption and implementation of specified guidelines related to the health and prevention of sexual misconduct against student athletes, prohibitions against institutions retaliating against student athletes as specified, and requirements related to federal Title IX. The University System of Maryland institutions, Morgan State University, and athletic associations including the National Collegiate Athletic Association, the NCAA, must follow specified rules regarding student athlete compensation for the use of a student's name, image, or likeness, and professional representation of student athletes, and specified student athlete contracts must meet specified standards. There is one amendment from the sponsor, and it starts on page 36 of your voting packet, or a reprint starting on page 41, which would probably be a lot easier for you to see. So a good portion of this bill essentially was just struck out, and that involved all those very expensive requirements at the start. And what these amendments would do would make it exactly the same as the House bill. So as amended, the bill would require institutions to adopt certain guidelines related to student athletes, including prevention and assessment and treatment of sports-related conditions, exercise and supervision guidelines for students with life-threatening conditions, and return-to-play protocols. Certain reports would need to be submitted to the Commission and to committees of the General Assembly. USM, Morgan State, and athletic associations, including the NCAA, must follow specified rules regarding student-athlete compensation for the use of the student's name, image, or likeness, professional representation of student athletes, and specified student-athlete contracts must continue to meet specified standards. There's construction language in the bill that provides that nothing in the bill grants a student-athlete the right to make commercial use of names, trademarks, logos, or other intellectual property owned or controlled by the public institution of higher education. There was no opposition at the hearing.
It's been moved. Is there a second? Moved and seconded as motion on the amendment, which makes it like the House. It's been moved and seconded. The bill and the amendment are before you. I've got a question. And so if the amendment's adopted, a student can benefit from image and likeness or not?
Yes.
Regardless of what the NCAA does?
Yes.
Okay.
That's a short answer is yes.
No, that's great. Senator Ellis.
Mr. Chairman. So I'm looking at the committee testimony, and University System of Maryland came in unfavorable. Is this after the amendments they switched?
Correct. So apparently, even though they did submit that testimony, even at the hearing, I did hear from their representative, and they were supportive of it, especially because it was very expensive with the health care and other type of conditions that were originally imposed by the bill. The scholarship mandate alone was incredibly expensive for the universities. So once that was taken out and it was paired back to what's in there now, they became favorable.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any objection to adopting the amendment? Seeing none, the amendment's been adopted. The bill as amended, further discussion. Does it make it exactly like the House version? Okay. Senator Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If anyone is curious about, on page 9 of 11, the 3 guidelines, brain injury, heat illness, and rhabdomyolysis. I looked it up in case anyone is curious. It's a serious syndrome due to direct or indirect muscle injury. It results from the death of muscle fibers and the release of their contents into the bloodstream. Serious complications including kidney failure. Just so everybody knows what we're voting on.
So we shouldn't ask any of our colleagues to ask that question on the floor of the Senate, that's all. Okay, anybody going to be voting against this bill? Seeing no red lights, no hands, it'll be marked as unanimous and reported to the floor.
Senate Bill 523, State Board of...
I will tell you, the Senator has been working on this for a couple of years. This is one he's been putting his shoulder to the grindstone and trying to come up with something. So this is a pretty significant achievement in the state of Maryland to come up with this policy. So he should get some accolades for that. So, yes, Ms. Foxworth.
All right, moving on to Senate Bill 523. State Board of Examiners for audiologists, hearing aid dispensers, and speech-language pathologists, duties, appointment of members, and requirements for licensees. This is sponsored by Senator Lamb by request from Board of Examiners for audiologists, hearing aid dispensers, and speech-language pathologists. The bill makes several changes to the audiologist health occupations article and board. It includes the Board of Examiners for audiologists, hearing aid dispensers, and speech-language pathologists into the list of health occupations boards in the statutes. In statute, and it adds individuals licensed by the board as healthcare professionals under our statute. Changes board appointment procedures. Bill creates notification procedures for board vacancies as well. Requires the board, to notify all licensed speech-language pathologists and all audiologists in the state of a vacancy on the respective board in order to receive nominations for that vacancy amongst those licensees. The bill now allows nominations and recommendations for consumer member seats to come from the general public and removes a mandate that would require the Department of Disabilities to solicit these nominations. The bill requires the governor to appoint audiologists and speech-language pathologist positions based on board recommendations and in conformance with that notice that will go out about nominations from the list of licensees. The bill requires the board to create a balloting process that would allow all audiologists to vote on who would fill the vacancy, clarifies that the board has discretion to waive qualifications for licensures. And finally, the bill requires licensees to identify and represent themselves by name, profession, and degree earned, and requires the board to make the list of all licensees public on their website. There is no opposition to the bill. There is a sponsor amendment beginning on page 47, sponsored by Senator Lamb. The amendment integrates additional requests from the Board of Examiners for audiologists, hearing aid dispensers, and speech-language pathologists. And the amendments remove the balloting process for audiologists and speech-language pathologists, removes the requirement for the board to make the list of licensees public, and instead restores the requirement that exists in current law for the licensee to display their official license conspicuously in their place of employment. That's the language. It has to be displayed conspicuously in their place of employment.
Let's put the bill in front of us. It's been moved, it's been seconded. I'm going to use the same two to put the amendment in front of us. Discussion on the amendment? Anybody object to the amendment? Yes, you want to speak to it?
Just one question, Mr. Chair. Ms. Fox, did you say the amendment took off the requirement for the practitioners to have their name on the website? Yeah.
Of the requirement, you're correct, of the list of names to be published on the website. The only requirement now is for the licensee to display their name
In the office.
conspicuously in their place of employment.
So who's the draft of that amendment?
Senator Lamb is the sponsor of it.
Okay, could I, thank you, ma'am. Senator Lamb, why would you want to not have the licensees' names on the website easily searchable by the public?
I think it was at the request of the board, actually. So most of the bill is really at the request of the board. I think it was because the extra effort involved in compiling it into the website. So at their request, we took that off.
Yeah. So how would that serve the public well if they're checking to see if someone is really licensed? I know as a CPA, you punch on my name in the Maryland Board of Accounts, and you'll see my name pops up. Everyone search active CPA. That helps people to understand who is what. I'm not sure why we would deprive the public of that information and knowledge.
I mean, I think they can, so like the Board of Physicians, you can punch someone in and look them up too.
Mm-hmm.
I think you can still call the board and ask them, you know, I have an appointment with this audiologist. I just want to make sure that they're licensed in the state, and they can run that through with them, and they can check their own database over the phone. It's just that I think they wanted to not go through the effort of creating it on the website.
I'm sorry, you think what?
I think I think their intent is to not go through the effort of having to create it on the website.
I think that's a useful public function in the age of online, digital, internet, for folks to easily find these information. You know, why would we go to, you know, and people answering the phone really is very scarce among public institutions. And so, you know, with like vaccination, stuff like that. I mean, it's really hard to get public. So I really would
Senator,
object
you can
to that.
offer an amendment. I mean,
Okay. I was trying to understand first. Okay, so,
well, but I think
yeah.
I think it's
So-
been explained. I mean, just because there's been explanation doesn't mean we can't entertain an amendment
Okay.
to change it, strengthen it, weaken it.
So I would move that we require the board to list the names of licensees on public website.
Discussion. Okay, you want to speak or not? Okay, all those, he's taking no position. All those in favor signify by raising your hand. I count 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, maybe 11, I don't know. Okay, the amendment is adopted, as well as, did we adopt the other amendment?
Yes.
Okay, so the bill is amended with the two amendments. Discussion. Seeing none, anybody find this abhorrent or is going to vote no? Okay, it'll be sent to the floor with the unanimous support.
Senate Bill 5.
This is one we've never seen before.
Right. Senate Bill 525, just to remind you, this is Baltimore City Centralized Booking Facility, Voting Information, and Early Voting Centers. So this committee adopted an amendment that would essentially strike the bill as it was, requiring the facility to establish an early voting center. And it now requires the state board to provide the booking facility with a drop box so that individuals, inmates in the facility can drop election-related materials for the local board of Baltimore City to collect those materials on a weekly basis and to send a report to the committees on the information that's collected. Senator Kagan has an amendment. It's on page 48 of your voting packet. What this amendment does, and It's hard to read, and I couldn't produce a reprint because it's an amendment to Senator McCrae's amendments. So it defines election-related materials and requires the Baltimore City Local Board of Elections to collect the materials from the drop box at least weekly. And that's it.
Yeah, I'm going to assume the bill is before us because we've had it moved before. So the amendment, we're on this amendment proffered by the vice chair, which she moves. Is there a second? Second. Discussion on the amendment. Senator Simon I'm sorry. Oh, I'll come back to you afterwards.
Yeah, I actually reached out to the department. It sounded like they're fine with it. They had one just technical thing. I think they said in the amendment, one place it said the state and the other said the State Board of Elections, and is that the same thing?
For it?
Yeah.
So we don't say the state board pays for it, we say the state pays for it because the money comes from the state. I did forget that part. The state will pay for the drop box that is provided to the facility. Thank you.
Okay, the bill as amended, we do have a letter. Oh, I'm sorry, Madam Vice Chair.
That's right. That was actually the exact same part that I was going to flag. Not only that SBE would pay for it, but actually we've been informed that they already have an extra drop-off box, so there would be no cost in ordering another one. So I just wanted to share that.
Amended before us. Will anybody, I see no red lights, no hands. I'm sorry, Senator Lamb.
Yeah, so thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will vote yes on this bill, but I just want to draw a distinction that, although the title kind of points this out as a local bill, I think the fact of the matter is that it's a state facility in a local jurisdiction. The jurisdiction's putting this forward, but at least from my perspective, I don't view this as a local bill or issue. It just happens to have that in the title because it's a facility that's in that local jurisdiction itself. So, for precedent setting and all those considerations later on, this is a pilot program in a local jurisdiction.
Thank you for that comment. I guess I want to ask committee counsel, what defines what's a local bill and what's a statewide bill, and is there any formal designation?
There's no formal designation of what a local bill is. So I think for the most part, most would consider it a bill that only changes requirements for a single county or a single jurisdiction that is putting forth that piece of legislation. But as Senator Lamb pointed out, this is a state-run facility, and though it is located in Baltimore City.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I totally agree with Senator Lamb, and I wonder whether there's a wisdom to just amending the title of the bill, and would that offend anybody? Just so we're totally clear that it's no longer really a local bill, if it ever was one.
I would support that, just to be clear.
Well, what about if it's centralized booking facility in Baltimore City? I mean, does that achieve?
You mean adding the words in Baltimore City after centralized booking facility?
Removing Baltimore City,
Yeah.
that it's central booking facility in Baltimore City. So it doesn't start with Baltimore City
Right,
with the implication that it's a local bill.
Right.
Does Mr. Demarinis have any thoughts about this? Jared, do you have any concerns or questions or thoughts about this?
No, I think that, whether it's a pilot or a local bill, we're going to implement it with the local boards, so.
Great. I love the Lamb idea.
Anybody object? I'm sorry, Senator Washington followed by Senator Carrozza.
I don't object, and I support it. I think I made a similar comment during their discussion earlier. So I agree, it's a state facility, and that's appropriate. So I support that amendment.
I think if you're going to change the title, you're also going to change it to Dropbox and it's not an early voting polling place. That would also be misleading in the title.
The title was changed in the amendments. It's just not reflected yet
Okay.
until those amendments are adopted.
I see no, you want to speak, Clarence?
No.
Okay. I'm sorry, Senator Ellis.
Yeah, thank you, sir. So I know, listening to the bill here, and this facility holds charged individuals from different jurisdictions, and I agree with Senator Lamb, this is not a local bill. So if someone, say from Charles County, is held at that facility and they decide to vote, does this bill take care of that, getting the back to county? So.
The drop box will be for any voter, and any material, even if it's not a Baltimore City local or even for candidates in that jurisdiction, what the local board will do is will send that material to that local board in the jurisdiction in which it belongs.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Senator.
Can I make a small tweak to the amendment, to the Kagan amendment, which is, like I was just looking at the first title where it says Department of Housing and Community Development. Can we add, in place of removing Baltimore City, which I support, which was the amendment, adding Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services at the beginning of this, similar to other bills of this nature?
Repeat that, Senator.
So instead of, so I think we amended to remove the words Baltimore City before centralized booking facility. If we
And put it after.
and put it after, but put the words Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services at the beginning.
What is the import of that?
Just to make clear that it's pertaining directly to that department. It's a statewide bill. It's a state bill, not necessarily a local bill.
What's the will of the body?
It's also State Board of Elections, and since it's both entities, I think it, I mean,
Okay.
and it doesn't, right, it doesn't end up going in code, right? This is just for the floor, for the good of the floor.
Okay, that's fine. All right,
Okay.
I'll rescind.
Okay. The bill as amended a couple of times, the bill as amended is in front of you with the amendments that have been offered by the Vice Chair and adopted, the verbal amendment by Lamb Kagan on the title. Any other debate or questions? We can do a roll call unless anybody want to be recorded as in opposition. I see Gallion, I see Carrozza. So 9-2, the bill passes and will go to the floor as such. Next.
Senate Bill 537, pharmacists, required notification and authorized substitution, lower cost drug or device product. This is sponsored by Senator Hershey. The bill requires a pharmacist to inform a customer of a therapeutically equivalent brand name drug that is the lowest cost alternative to the generic drug that was originally prescribed for them. Pharmacist also has to tell the customer of the particular cost difference between the therapeutic equivalent drug and the drug as originally described or prescribed. The bill, and instead of mandating, it permits a pharmacist to substitute therapeutically equivalent brand name drug for a generic drug that was originally prescribed, so long as the prescription doesn't mandate that the prescription is to only be distributed or only to be dispensed as directed by the prescriber. And so long as the substitution is recognized in the Food and Drug Administration, FDA's current list of approved drugs with therapeutic equivalencies, or is interchangeable with the originally prescribed drug. And so long as the consumer is charged less for said substitution. The bill states that the determination of whether a consumer or a customer with drug coverage is charged less for the substitution is based on the prescription drug benefit and formulary write-up. And finally, after a substitution is made, the pharmacist is required to notify the patient in writing of the substitution. There was opposition from the Office of the Attorney General Consumer Protection Division, making some claims there. And one sponsor amendment, which begins, I think, on page 50 of our packet. And the amendment is based on concerns that the Board of Pharmacy wrote up in an informational letter, so they didn't sign up as in support or in opposition, but they made or provided some information for the committee. In this sponsor amendment, it clarifies that, so the portion where whether a customer with drug coverage is charged less for the substitution is based on the prescription drug benefit and formulary. The concern through the Board of Pharmacy is that that information wasn't readily available or they didn't have access to it. So we qualified that by saying customer with drug coverage is charged less for the substitution so long as the information in the prescription drug benefit and formulary is readily available to the pharmacist, and it also requires the pharmacist to indicate in a record, so record-keeping requirement, that a customer has been notified of the substitution that the pharmacist made.
Is there a motion on the bill? Okay, is there a second? Yeah. I have a little concern. The Attorney General Consumer Affairs raises some fairly substantive conversations. I don't know if there's a way to fix it.
Did the amendments take care of your concern?
That's what I just.
I don't think so. The Office of the Attorney General believes the current policy, where it allows dispense as written and not substitution, better serves the consumer. I haven't fully integrated their comments. Look, I would like to look at this a little more closely, but if you want to push the bill, Senator, I'll just vote against it.
We should take a vote up or down.
Okay,
We should move it.
okay. I have Senator Washington first.
Yeah, fine.
Thank you. I was kind of slow on moving unfavorable, so you got me. Sorry, everybody. But yeah, unless, it seems to me, unless, Chairman, unless we delete section, I guess, D on page 3, it seems like we'd have to significantly amend the bill. And so I would, based on the favorable, I'd be voting no on the favorable. So, based on the Attorney General's concerns and the Board of Pharmacy's concerns, I don't think that I don't think this is a consumer-oriented bill.
Other discussion on the bill. You want to speak to it?
No, just,
Okay, we will, but we want to let people speak to it. Do you want to speak? Vice Chair, please.
I did reach out just now to the Attorney General's office to see whether the amendment mollifies their concern. And while we're waiting for that, I just want to read the last sentence of their testimony, which is from the Attorney General Consumer Protection Division. We are unable to propose alternative amendments adequate to mitigate our concerns, despite our agreement with the bill's apparent goal of reducing prescription drug costs and improving patient medication adherence. So a thumbs up for the goal, but a thumbs down for the verbiage, says the Attorney General Consumer Protection Division.
Okay, let's do a roll call.
No.
Yeah, I have to tell you, I'm torn on this. I mean, conceptually and the interest, I'm very supportive of, and I think it's the right frame, but I have concerns, and I don't want to pass it with those concerns. If we had more time, maybe there was a way to marry this, but given we have to go on up or down, I'm going to be voting no. The favorable goes down 4 to 7. So The reverse, it'll be 7-4 unfavorable.
Senate Bill 632, Election Law, Contested Elections. This bill establishes and modifies specified thresholds relating to when a candidate or a registered voter, in the case of a ballot question, can petition for a recount and when a county, as opposed to a petitioner, must pay for the cost of a recount. The bill also establishes provisions governing contested election committees and prohibits a person from accepting a donation or making a disbursement relating to a contested election unless the person establishes a contested election committee and discloses donations received and disbursements made by the committee. There is one amendment on page 51 of your packet, and this amendment alters the definitions of contribution and expenditure to include money donated to a campaign or used to assist in payment of expenses associated with contesting an election under Title 12. It provides that the provisions of Title 12, Subtitle 3 regarding contested election committees only applies to candidates accepting public campaign financing from a county or the state under Title 15, and prohibits certain persons who accept public campaign financing from soliciting or accepting donations to the contested election committee in excess of limits established by either the county or the state. And it requires repayment of unspent public contributions before paying off other debts and closing an account.
Is there a motion? It's been moved and seconded. Discussion on the bill. Again, it codifies practice generally. Seeing no further discussion?
There's another amendment.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, okay. So there's also another amendment, so you can tell me what, I think Senator Simonaire had a question on this first amendment? Just on the bill in general. Your call, Mr. Chairman. What do you want to do?
Let's get it in
The Pinsky amendment?
Yeah. It's more generic. Please. Do people have the amendment?
Yeah, I just handed it out to you in a separate paper.
Either Ms. Goodman or the Vice Chair want to explain it?
As folks on this committee know, an increasing number of counties are now exploring or launching or planning for public financing of local elections. It does not apply to us at this point, but it does apply to county execs and county council members more and more. So this amendment, which at the top is number 303824/1, clarifies and just provides some details for public financing. And to a local candidate, and there ends up being a recount, and the candidate raises money that is matched by the government, and if the candidate raises more money than is needed for the recount, the government gets paid back first, and then the donors. So it's not that you can keep it in a fund. It's not that you can spend it elsewhere, as we can with our own accounts, and give it to a nonprofit or give it to the party or anything like that. So this is prescribing that pretty carefully.
Okay. On the amendment, we'll get back to Senator Simonaire in a minute. Any objection to the amendment? So adopted. Senator Simonaire?
Thank you. So I guess this is tightening it. I guess they could have petitioned any other time. Now we're saying it has to be less than 5%. Is that, did I read that correctly? Let's see, the highest number of votes in the office greater than 5%. They may not petition a recount.
So, Jared, if you want to jump in, but it basically sets parameters which don't exist in current law. So it's there's when the candidate has to pay and when government has to pay. So when it's super narrow and it really could be an error or something, then the government is going to have to pay. If it's further than that, but not absurdly further than that, if someone loses by tens of thousands of votes, statewide, let's say, there's not going to be a recount because it's just, it's not worth the time and money. But if it's reasonably close, but outside the window of 0.25%, then the candidate can say, I think there were problems and I'm willing to put my money where my mouth is.
Okay, and that, I remember that testimony. I thought that was good.
Yeah.
The other part, you said it codifies existing practice. Do they have the contested election committee?
I said that I was confused with the other bill about contributing during session. I'm
Okay.
that was me and it was wrong.
So this contested election committee, that's new?
Yes.
Okay. So can you just walk me through the timeline as far as how long do you have before you can contest? Is there a window that you can contest it?
Jared, walk us through what it looks like.
Sure. Just let me.
And the reason I'm asking that, and you can maybe answer this in that question, it seems like you need this new committee to pay for it, and there's limits on how much you can get per donor. And if I just ran an election, I may have used all my money and all that. I'm tired of raising money. It's a close race. I've got to go out and raise money in this other committee, whereas current law would allow somebody else, if they wanted, they could just provide the money for get a recount. Is that summing that up correctly?
So under this law here, Senator, you can use your campaign account to now fund the recount and to pay for the actual filing of the fees. So you can use anything you want out of your campaign account. Public financing accounts would have to then go out and form a new political committee because of the fact that they receive public financing, and you don't want to have that commingled with this type of account. And so that they would have to go out and then they can fundraise, and for all intents and purposes, the counties can then set their limits, how they can fundraise and whether or not they would have matching funds for that ability for their recount. So recounts have to be basically initiated. Let's say this here. So. After the canvass is done and we have after the election. And so there's a period of a window that you'll know that, the election is going to be tight. Then you still have the canvasses for the mail-in ballots that are going on, as well as provisional ballots. There's a few days after that, there's a deadline for which you would then have to request whether you would want to do a recount of the entire ballot, that you would have to go to court and then provide the money for the bond for that, for the cost of that, if it falls outside the window. So now that window is going to be 0.25%, and so it's from basically 2.51% to 5% is something that the candidate would have to pay for.
Okay, so
and there's enough time in between those gaps there that campaigns would have the ability, if it's tight, would have the ability to raise that money if they so.
I'm going to know whether I'm going to pay for it or whether it's going to be through the government based on the percentage. So I'll know that up front. And then I imagine it could be quite a large cost. And maybe it was a tough race. I spent all my campaign money. Where can I get the money to raise? I guess it sounds like there's two tiers. One if you had publicly funded account, and one if you're not publicly funded. Can Joe Smith put in $20,000 for me to get a recount, or does it have to come from me through an account through this committee, or is that just for the public version of it?
So the public financing one would have to be with the limits, basically whatever limits the counties want to establish for it. And since most public financing committees have $250 or less, I would assume that they would have the same sort of donation or contribution limits. This bill now basically allows you to fundraise up to the $6,000 limit for recounts from all your sources that are available to you. And you can seek additional transfers in, and it would just be a part of monies that you can raise for it. And if you have extras, it would just be a part of your campaign account. You have no additional reporting or filings with this, while the public financing accounts would have to have additional reports filed when the petition for recounts are initiated.
Can I just ask one last?
So basically, for example,
we've got that, Jared.
for a local office, the deadline for a petition for recount would be July 11th, 2022, when you had the primary that would exist.
Gotcha. Can I ask one more question?
On June 28th.
If you have a public finance account, can that person then go out on their own and raise money, or do they have to stay with the public account to get it certified or recounted? In other words, I just had a publicly funded account. It was close. I want to do a recount. Do I have to stay with the public account, or can I go out and just on my own donor?
I would say you have to stay with the public financing account.
Yeah, you signed up, you're in that lane. I think you stay in that lane. You signed up as a public financing candidate, you stay in the public financing lane. And the one exception, and Jared, please confirm this, you can still spend your own money as part of the First Amendment free speech right that has been recognized in courts. So if I'm uber wealthy, I don't have to do any of this. I can just put my own cash down.
Correct.
Nope, if you're public. Jared, does that apply to public financing? For a personal, for the candidate themselves.
I would assume, basically, that individual has
Still have.
In order to take the public financing, that individual has given up certain, rights, which would be that they do not have the ability to spend unlimited sums of money, which is why candidates can only give on public financing bills. They limit the amount a candidate would either loan or contribute to campaigns.
Yeah, and look, the recounts we know are few and far between. This just clarifies what the numbers are. So, discussion on the amendments. I think we've adopted the amendments. Discussion on the bill clarifying recounts. Let's do a roll call.
One thing before we vote, I just want to clarify there was a drafting error. I sent it to Ms. Goodman, and so it's not changing any of the details, but I just want to flag for the committee and anyone who cares and is watching. There'll just be a minor tweak.
Okay, roll call on 532, 632.
Senator Kagan?
Aye.
Senator Lamb?
Yes.
Senator Hester?
Yes.
Senator Ellis?
Yes.
Senator Gallion?
Yes.
Senator Carozza?
Yes.
Senator Washington?
Yes.
Senator Riley?
Yes.
Senator Patterson?
Yes.
Senator Simonaire?
Yes.
And Senator Penske?
Yes. Okay, 11-0, we'll go to the floor. Jared, I think that's it for election law, so have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Keep going. Klausmeier, 650.
Senate Bill 650, work group to evaluate the establishment of a regional waste disposal facility. This bill requires the Maryland Department of the Environment to convene a work group to evaluate the establishment of a regional waste disposal facility that serves Anne Arundel, Baltimore, Carroll, Harford, and Howard counties, as well as Baltimore City. The work group must report its findings to the Governor and the General Assembly by December 1st, 2021. There are two amendments from the bill sponsor, Senator Klausmeier. The first is on page 55 of your voting packet. This amendment would push back the reporting deadline by 1 year to December 1st, 2022. The second is on page 56. This amendment would require the work group to look at the establishment of a regional waste diversion and disposal facility, rather than just a waste disposal facility, and add an expert in zero waste principles to the work group, and require the work group's report to include proposals on market development.
I think we actually had the bill before us with the amendment. Senator Gallion, I know you had a question because Harford County was mentioned. Has that been resolved?
First.
Well, you precipitated the hold. So
I have, yes, and we looked at that a little bit, but I do have issues with the bill I'd like to speak on, but I don't want to, button lines.
Senator Patterson.
I think I'm okay now that I realize this is a regional concept. I want to know why it was not inclusive of Prince George's County.
Okay, the bill as amended is before us. Senator Gallion?
Yes, I've been researching this some, and I just really don't think this legislation is necessary. These counties are already kind of working together. They're part of this Northeast Maryland Waste Disposal Authority. I think they could really do this without legislation. And also with the BMC, the Baltimore Metropolitan Council, I think they could work together and do something like this. I just really don't think it's necessary to have legislation, so I'd like to move unfavorable.
Before the hold, we had the bills amended in front of us. I think it was a favorable one, not to preclude you, but I think when you offered the hold, I think we had the bill with the amendments before us. Obviously, you can vote no, and if it goes down, it becomes an unfavorable, Senator. Senator Freihester.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had the opportunity to reach out both to the Carroll County commissioners and also to the Howard County, and they were actually both surprised that this legislation was in front of us. They're currently in discussions about the issue, as part of this Northeast Maryland Waste Disposal Authority. And so they're very happy to continue to engage in the dialogue, but they were curious about why there was legislation and why they weren't consulted. So I was just wondering if we could maybe write a letter or something. But they're already in discussion. So I've got more questions than answers at this point.
I mean, my read of this, it's being driven obviously by Baltimore County and Arundel County. But other counties aren't in this coalition, so they are clearly named here. I don't know why they came, the bill was introduced, but I believe the senator put it in on behalf of Baltimore County. Beyond that, I don't know. I don't know why they want it more formalized. I don't know if that gives them any kind of legitimacy. I don't know. So, I mean, it's the will of the body.
Another question came up on page 2, line 13. It's pretty prescriptive. This means it says provide a commitment to phase out incineration. I know, and Hartford and Baltimore County are relying on that. So does that mean the work group has to somehow come to that conclusion, or how does that work? How does that fit in? I just have concerns about that. Line 13 on page 2.
You're right that the bill would require the work group to issue a report that includes proposals that provide a commitment to phase out the incineration. So that is part of the task of this work group.
Okay, and I just have issues. I think that kind of paints some of these counties into a corner, and I definitely wouldn't be comfortable with that. So thank you.
I'm going to pull it and hold it, and we'll maybe take it up another time. But I don't want it to get in the way of other bills. So it is on a temporary hold. We'll see. I just want to keep rolling here. And if it's true that they can do it anyway, we shouldn't spend a lot of time debating something that may or may not have import. Next bill.
661, Environment, Maryland Oil Disaster Containment Cleanup and Contingency Fund, and Oil Contaminated Site Environmental Cleanup Fund, funding, reallocation, and reimbursements. This bill extends the current fee of 8 cents per barrel assessed on oil transferred into the state until July 1st, 2024. Beginning July 1st, 2024, the fee is 5 cents per barrel. The full 8 cents per barrel is credited to the Maryland Oil Disaster Containment, Cleanup, and Contingency Fund, or the Oil Fund. The bill authorizes in fiscal 2022 through 2026 funds from the Oil Fund to be used to reimburse owners of a heating oil tank that applied for funding from the Oil Contaminated Site Environmental Cleanup Fund, or the Reimbursement Fund, on or before June 30th, 2021. So the bill is introduced, phases out that reimbursement fund, but lets people who had applied to that fund before June 30th, 2021 seek reimbursement from the Oil Fund. There is an amendment in your packet on page 57 being offered by Senator Lamb. This would maintain the current fee of 8 cents per barrel, but would also maintain the current split of 7.75 cents per barrel going into the Oil Fund and 0.25 cents per barrel going into the Reimbursement Fund until July 1st, 2024. Amendment would also allow the Oil Fund to be used to reimburse residential owners of oil tanks who apply to the Reimbursement Fund on or before June 30th, 2024. So it essentially creates sort of a grace period where people can continue to apply to the Reimbursement Fund through June 30th, 2024. And finally, the amendment requires the Department of the Environment to study the Oil Fund and the efforts the state has made to replace aging residential heating oil tanks as specified.
Okay, I don't remember if we moved the bill when we had it before us last time or not. Let's just, is there a motion? It's been moved. Is it seconded? Seconded. Senator Lamb, you want to talk about the amendment and your posture on this?
Sure. So happy to thank you, April, for introducing the amendment. So the amendment is basically will continue both funds for 3 years and then also have a study over 2 years to figure out how they can handle the reimbursement fund in the future. We did speak with Ellen Valentino, who represents the oil manufacturer producers, and she's comfortable with this amendment. We just heard back within the hour from MDE. They're also comfortable with the posture of this amendment. And I did offer it to the bill sponsor as well. I think he's had a chance to look over this too. And I'll let him speak for himself on the amendment. But, I think that's the amendment itself, so.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I did speak with the advocate for this piece of legislation. She is okay with it, but I have a question about those percentage again. I thought we were going to stick strictly with the 8%. You said something about 7.5 something. Did you change any percentages of the revenue here?
We didn't change any percentages, but I think there is a part of it that goes. There's two funds,
different
right?
places, yeah.
Right, and so there's a split that goes to the oil fund, and then a smaller amount that goes to the reimbursement fund.
Well,
I think that is maintained in the current posture.
That's the same as it was before. Yeah. Okay, then I'm okay.
Any objection to the amendments? Seeing none, they are adopted. The bill as amended, which we believe is consensus and people are comfortable with it. Will anybody be voting against it? I see no red lights or hands. It'll be marked as unanimous and taken to the floor. Next bill.
Senate Bill 684, Maryland Licensure of Certified Midwives Act. This is sponsored by Senator Lamb. This bill creates a licensure for certified midwives by the Board of Nursing, defines the scope of practice for certified midwifery, provides licensure exemptions by the board, provides requirements for the application and qualifications of the licenses. I'm sorry, I lost my place. It establishes license expiration, renewal, reinstatement, and surrender, and it grants the Board of Nursing the authority over licensure denial, reprimands, and discipline, and outlines those circumstances fit for licensure denial, reprimand, and discipline as well. There is no opposition to the bill, and there are a set of amendments within your voting packet, so we're at the end of your voting packet. Actually, let me clarify. So the amendment that I passed around, some of you may have seen it, some of you may not have seen it, ends in 564332-1. So we're going to defer to that one. The difference between the one in your packet and this updated one is minor, but let's defer to SB 0684-564332-1, which you should have received in your hand. And so these amendments are sponsored by Senator Lamb as well, and they're based on the Board of Nursing recommendations to match the licensure scheme with other boards within their purview. The amendments add language to allow the licensure of certified midwives to correlate with language within the nursing title. The amendments require the licensee to submit to an application if there's credible information that said licensee could harm someone, makes several technical amendments, removes provisions concerning reasonable fees, and adds language regarding the purpose of board fees, and states that the fees will go into the Board of Nursing Fund, removes disciplinary consequences for practicing on an unrenewed license or practicing with an unrenewed license, and replaces the disciplinary consequence for that into a disciplinary consequence for engaging in unprofessional or immoral conduct. And it adds licensure reinstatement procedures and adds provisions relating to the scope of board authority.
Is there a favorable on the bill or a motion on the bill, I should say? Been moved, been seconded. The amendments, anybody object to the amendments? Seeing none, the amendments are adopted. The bill's amended in front of you. Discussion on the bill as amended. Seeing nothing, seeing no red lights. Anybody want to vote against it, or should we just put it down as unanimous? Okay, unanimous, 11-0 on 684. Next bill. Let me make another announcement, which I should have done at the beginning of the meeting. We have a number of bills where budget and tax is second, formally. We also have a number of bills that we were either considering or voted on that had significant price tags, $250,000, $300,000, $800,000. Budget and tax is looking at those, but they are not moving quickly because they have not received the budget, which they will be receiving in the next 4 or 5 days. So they can't commit to $500,000 here, $500,000 there, because it adds up to millions of dollars. So they do have a number of our bills either under our purview or we're sitting on until we get the okay to proceed with the bills. So, you know, any other slowdown of your bill or some of your colleagues' bills might also be on the financial side of it, not the policy side. So I just want to alert you to that. I spoke with the Chair of Budget and Tax yesterday, I think, on this issue. Senator Patterson?
Maybe we might not get a decision prior to crossover?
I mean, there's a possibility. We can't make them act any faster than they act.
I don't think there's ill will. You know, if we send over or have bills in front of us, 5 to 10 that go anywhere from $250,000 to $1 million, and I don't know about JPR and finance. I mean, they could have $20 million in requests or $10 million in requests, and they got to figure out where in the budget it'll be. So, I mean, I don't think they're doing it out of malice. That's all. Senator Ellis.
Question now. So what's the dollar amount cut off where they have to act?
There's informally, I think it was 100,000 or 150,000. And so on some that were more, we haven't moved them for a vote because budget and tax wasn't second, but they have to say, yes, it's okay to proceed with that bill.
Okay.
So there's some where they were second they're sitting on, there's some where we haven't moved them yet. So they are on the list, but I got to wait.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Okay, Senate Bill 701, Bay Restoration Fund, County Authority to Incur Indebtedness. This bill authorizes a county to borrow money and incur indebtedness through the issuance and sale of notes in anticipation of the receipt of the county's allocation of funds from the Bay Restoration Fund. It also specifies that authorized uses of the net proceeds of the sale of any such notes, essentially to be used for septic upgrades. There are two amendments that are loose that I put on your desks. These are both, I'd say, really discussion amendments. The first one that says leave blank, this is number 554638/1, is really a clarifying amendment. The fiscal note writer in putting together the fiscal note actually pointed out that the bill is ambiguous, whether the authorization is just for, right now counties receive block grants from the septics account of the Bay Restoration Fund, and whether this bill was just intended to apply to those allocations or whether it was to apply to all allocations from the Bay Restoration Fund, so wastewater and septics. I did reach out to the sponsor. He said the intention was just the septics account. So this would just be a clarifying amendment to say that we're just talking about funds received from the separate account of the Bay Restoration Fund established under the cited section, which would be the septics account of the Bay Restoration Fund. The other set of amendments, again, this is just for discussion purposes. These are the House amendments to the House cross file, which would allow the septics account to be used, and this is more generally, so this is to allow the septics account of the Bay Restoration Fund to be used for all costs associated with the installation of best available technology systems or the repair or replacement of failing systems with best available technology systems, including engineering costs and costs associated with the installation or replacement of a septic system. So that's an expansion of the cost that counties could cover with that septics account money. That the bill sponsor he said he's ambivalent. The Senate bill sponsor is ambivalent on whether or not to move those.
So, Ms. Morton, how major a policy change is that?
My understanding of the way it works right now is that it's really only, I believe right now most counties are really only letting you use it for the technology itself, for the system itself, but not for those additional engineering, construction, installation cost. So it is potentially, it's an expansion. It's those can be very expensive, and it's a trade-off of, on the one hand, opening it up to those uses could encourage more people to do these septic upgrades, but on the other hand, you're potentially having fewer projects funded with the same pot of money.
Follow up with a question, then I'll move it on. Is this changing the law in the BRF, or is it changing their ability on indebtedness, or both?
The House amendments would change the ability under the septics account portion of the BRF.
Thank you. April, I thought I heard you say that it gives the county the authority to pay for the full cost, but not the requirement. Could you clarify that for me?
Right. I mean, the bill language, or the current language, is a little bit, it's a little bit ambiguous. It says that the account is to be used for the cost of repairing or replacing failing on-site sewage disposal systems, and this says all costs associated with the installation. So I would read that as authorizing. So it's saying that the county could do it.
Could do it, but not required to.
That is how I would read it, but it is
right.
ambiguous.
So again, we can make some legislative intent on our comments on the floor. Mr. Chairman, a big issue in Anne Arundel County was on the county council representing southern Anne Arundel County. Typical septic system costs between $10,000 and $12,000 to replace, but the enhanced technology was another $8,000 to $10,000, and that was the portion that was covered by the Bay Restoration Fund. That technology part, not the core part. This does expand it, and it's the same discussion we had about schools and solar panels. Do we allow a better product but less of them, or do we continue do we allow the counties to continue their current application of only for the advanced technology? And again, it's a policy question. If it's not ours, I'm comfortable leaving it to the county. If this amendment requires them to pay the full cost, I'd probably like to reword it to make it discretionary on the part of the counties.
Calling me Senator Carozza, I'm sorry, Senator Hester too. We can also pass part of it and punt on the second part of it. In other words, we could allow counties to take on the indebtedness and bond to increase their purchasing power and keep status quo on the policy because we haven't had an extensive discussion on it. So that's another option. Senator Carozza, followed by Senator Hester.
I just wanted to either better understand the amendments. This is a huge issue for my district. As a matter of fact, earlier this week, Wycomico County specifically had a town hall on septics. So yeah, I just wanted to understand. I see, MACO came in supporting it. Now we have these amendments. I'm trying to better understand if that's, as Senator Riley was saying, is it giving the counties more flexibility? But yeah, it's just this. Whatever changes we make, I think, should give the locals as much flexibility as possible.
Thank you. It's also a big issue, I think, across the entire state, but also in my district. I would like to better understand how much money is in the fund and whether that gets used up every year and how many projects are not funding, because I think that's the demand on the fund as it is an important part of the consideration for the policy.
Yeah, but the bill's allowing the county to go into indebtedness.
Right.
I don't know if Senator.
Thank you. So we have County A, County B. County A has enough money to fund all of the requests. They don't have to activate this bill. County B, like Baltimore County, maybe they have more projects than they can afford. So this bill authorizes that county to borrow money on a capital basis to do all the projects on the list and then use future years' cash flow to pay that off. In a sense, they're forward funding good environmental projects. But if they don't need it, they don't have to use it. And that's my understanding, Mr. Chair.
Sure, it affects the BRF account, whether septics or wastewater. It's using that money to leverage other money at the local level. That's my understanding. I think, please.
Full support of what Senator Riley just said. I think we should give the counties maximum ability to deal with this issue in a proactive manner. My understanding of what the council said was that it did both, that the bill enabled this thing, but then enabled the authority with the amendment, right?
The last amendment is the House amendment, which added a new layer of policy.
So I think my request about the funding was related to the amendment, not the bill. So I guess.
The funding works right now, and according to the numbers that I got, that the Bay Commission gave me, it's approximately $26 million annually for the septics revenue that goes into that septics account. And about $15 million of that is used for septics upgrades. And a lot of that, the way it's distributed is essentially through block grants to the counties. And then it's the counties who are responsible for using that money. I don't know, how many of them, my sense, based off of testimony on this bill and related bills in the past, is that the counties most counties get more applications for that money than what they have.
Take it one step at a time. Is the bill before us or not? Okay, a motion on the bill. It's moved. It's been seconded. Did the sponsor have amendments also that we have to adopt?
There are no sponsor amendments. There's a clarifying amendment that the sponsor said that he's good with, that reflects his intent, and then there's an amendment for discussion from the House.
Okay. The clarifying amendment, any objection to that?
Yes.
Okay, so right now, the bill as amended is in front of us. So the question is, do we want to move the House amendments, or do we want to pass? If we don't move them, there still could be an opportunity later on to have a conversation during conference. So I guess I would recommend we don't adopt the House at this point. We'll have more time to understand the implications. So is that the sentiment of the committee? Yes. Okay, then the bill as amended is before you. Will anybody be voting against it? Sure.
Just on the bill. April, can you just run me at a high level through the financing of this? So we've got the septic money. We're allowing the county to take on more debt. So let's say they get $500,000 or $1 million a year, so they can fund a lot more projects using that money to pay for the bonds. Yes. And they set that aside for the next 30 years that they just received, or is it the anticipation they're going to get more money the next year to pay for those events, or they can create more?
The idea is that they would, so say in a year when they had a bunch of projects that they wanted to do, they could essentially borrow against their anticipated, or issue bonds against what they anticipate that they will receive in future years, because it's a pretty steady level of funding. One thing that the fiscal note points out, though, is that level of funding is set to decrease at some point in the future, so that's something that counties would have to take into account if they do decide to issue these bonds, is that funding level is set in statute to go down, but just based off of the fees.
Because we've discussed this fund somewhere before, on the floor, I think. But so I actually read that article, and in the state law, they do bonding for like the wastewater and so forth, and they said that you can't decrease the fee associated with the bonds that are outstanding. Basically, that gives, I guess, the bonding agency knowing they're going to get paid. The legislature could come in and divert some of that money in the future, which would, I guess, which may not be a problem. I guess the counties would have to take it from their own county money to pay for it. So I guess that's okay as long as they know that in advance, correct? Okay.
April, let's be clear. You mentioned the bond. My recollection of the hearing was that the local jurisdiction would finance it in some manner with a favorable interest rate. I don't remember them saying bonds. Yeah, okay, thank you. And that's the issue. A bond requires a very systemic, ongoing, scheduled cash flow. My recollection was preferred financing backed by the good faith and full credit of the counties or the municipalities, and they would qualify for a very low, favorable interest rate. And if the money wasn't coming in, Senator Simon, they would have to find a way internally to pay for it. But they're anticipating fairly level cash flow. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know more about this effluent. Effluent.
We have the bill as amended with a clarifying amendment in front of us. We're going to hold off on the House amendments. Any further discussion? Anybody want to vote no? Okay, then we will mark the West Bill 701 favorable as amendment, the small amendment, and people should keep an eye on this and try to get as much information as possible in terms of implications for the point that Senator Riley raised about what the House is suggesting.
I'll be on the conference committee.
Okay, you know a lot more than I do.
Oh, know all about effluent.
Okay. Next bill.
21, Procurement Small Business Reserve Program, Administration and Application. This bill requires that specified contracts eligible for the Small Business Reserve and with a total value of $500,000 or less be designated for the Small Business Reserve, subject to specified guidelines and exemptions. It also requires public four-year institutions of higher education in the state to participate in the Small Business Reserve. There is an amendment in your voting packet on page 69 being offered by Senator Hester. This amendment requires the Governor's Office of Small Minority and Women Business Affairs to assist small businesses in complying with procedures for bidding on or responding to requests for proposals for procurement contracts and increase awareness of procurement opportunities for small businesses. The amendment also requires the office to report annually to the Board of Public Works on the effectiveness of the Small Business Reserve Program.
Seeing none, no red, Senator.
I was just going to say that this bill basically codifies the existing governor's executive order. I thought it was such a good idea that we should put it into statute, and then it makes the amendments that April mentioned just go to provide that extra technical assistance to make sure that people know about it and they know how to do it.
Anybody be voting against this bill? Senator Ellis.
So, is there a requirement for the General Assembly to get a report also, or just the Board of Public Works?
The amendment only requires the report to go to the Board of Public Works.
Is there a reason why I wouldn't want it in the General Assembly? Sponsor, yeah.
I think that would be a perfectly fine, fine idea.
Okay, great. So could I amend to have a report?
To report coming to the General Assembly. Saying none, it's adopted. The bill is amended. Any opposition? Any opposition to debate, discussion? Please.
So this pertains to this bill and now and potentially others. We've had a lot of things where we talk about these reports that are going to come back. So does that go to like email to you and you send to the committee? Where do these actually go to? And I'm just curious. I mean, we hear about all these reports that are supposed to come back. Where do they go? Do they abyss somewhere or where?
Shifted to the committee council. It depends. If it says the appropriate committees and it names EHE and Budget and Tax and Ways and Means, it goes to those committees, it goes to the chairman or the staff, and then we hopefully distribute it. If it just says the General Assembly, I'm not sure. Ms. Morton?
Assembly, it essentially goes to the library. So you can get a copy of it, but you have to request it. And if you are interested in a particular report, if you reach out to the library proactively and say, you know, when these reports come in, please send them to me, they will do their best.
But I want to underline what they have a list of reports, and once a year, I think they used to say, check the ones you want or the topics you want, and they will forward them to you if you want even more mail, either electronic or hard. Yeah.
To know whether the reports in the library are also posted online? I thought so too. So
Yeah, most of them are available through the library's catalog. So like if it's a recent report that they've received in electronic format, it will be on their online.
So again, for anyone watching at home,
Library
if you're
card.
interested in any particular thing, it's not just that it gets sent to our committee or it goes in a dusty place. It actually is available if you search. Thank you.
Any objection to the bill? Anybody voting against it? Seeing none, the bill passes 11-0, will be reported to the floor. Next bill.
Senate Bill 744, State Board of Nursing, Certified Nursing Assistant Advisory Committee, Membership and Meetings. This is sponsored by Senator Eckert. Under the bill, the Board of Nursing is required to appoint an alternate for each of the 6 nursing assistant member positions, as opposed to 3, on the Board of Nursing Advisory Committee. The bill adds requirements for the advisory committee membership, as each member must be a United States citizen, a Maryland resident, must have practiced in their health occupation for at least 5 years. The bill clarifies membership terms and prohibits a member from serving more than 2 consecutive terms. It also outlines committee meetings that are mandatory, requires the board to fill advisory committee vacancy slots within 60 days to the extent that is practicable. There was no opposition and no amendments for the bill.
Seeing no objection, no red lights, I will record it as unanimous and pass it to the floor. Next bill.
780, States of Emergency, Emergency Procurement, and Budget Amendments, Notice and Authorization. This bill requires the governor or the head of a unit, when authorizing an emergency procurement during a declared state of emergency, to provide specified notice to the Legislative Policy Committee within 72 hours of the execution of the contract or the expenditure of funds. The bill also requires the governor to provide specified notice to the Legislative Policy Committee and, if applicable, the Administrative, Executive, and Legislative Review Committee within 72 hours after suspending the effect of a statute or rule or regulation during a declared state of emergency as authorized under state law. Finally, the bill authorizes any federal, special, or higher education fund appropriation to be increased by budget amendment upon a specified declaration by the Board of Public Works. The governor may not suspend the bill's provisions under any law that grants the governor authority to suspend the effect of any statute during a state of emergency. There is one amendment in your packet and then a separate amendment that was distributed and placed on your desk. The amendment in the packet is on page 71 from Senator Pinsky. This amendment strikes language requiring the Office of Legislative Audits to audit an emergency procurement contract authorized during a declared state of emergency, and instead adds language authorizing the Legislative Policy Committee to request such an audit. The other amendment that should be on your desk separately strikes language requiring a copy of the procurement contract to be submitted to the Legislative Policy Committee, and instead requires only that the name of the vendor and the amount of the contract be submitted. This was in response, I believe, to some concerns raised by the Department of General Services about having to redact contracts and submit, the full contract within that 72-hour period.
Okay, we need to put the bill in front of us. It's been moved, and we need a second. Is there a second? It's been seconded. Any objection? Well, let me explain. During the last year, there have been some things that have been fairly fast and loose. This will not stop any executive order purchase, emergency purchase. It simply says they got to tell the Legislative Policy Committee, which is made up of legislators, about the emergency purchase, and then the LPC can request an audit. The original language said they all would be audited. That was overkill. So this is about transparency. As I said in the hearing, we had to call a special hearing of our committee to try to get answers on the tests from South Korea, from the masks, from Blue Flame, and I think it was somewhat of an embarrassment. We need to move a little more nimbly, and then if it's fine, it goes to Board of Public Works, and they proceed with it. So that's what the bill does as amended. So are there any objection to either of the two amendments? The last amendment came from DGS. They didn't want the whole contract listed, just the vendor and the cost. I mean, we need to know how much money. That's very important. So I'm fine with their amendment, and I'd also move the other amendment on page 71. On the amendments, Senator Lamb.
So, and to the last amendment about not having the full contract, and I understand DGS's concern. I'm not going to oppose the amendment, but I think it's also sometimes very difficult to know what type of agreement was entered into and what the scope of work is without the actual contract. That oftentimes they'll give you a 50,000-foot view. Here are 5 bullet points as to what they're supposed to do. And we're seeing that now with an Ernst & Young contract that the state has entered into. We are missing, we've been given the contract and we've been missing the exhibits, for example, that go with the contract that actually define the scope of work. And we've been given 5 or 6 very top-level bullet points to be able to assess whether this $11 million contract was appropriate or not. I understand and they've provided a contract to us in redacted form, and I think that's appropriate, and I understand why DGS is hesitant about providing the contract in all cases. So I'm not going to oppose the amendment, but I just want to register that concern there.
And I think we all want to thank Senator Lamb. He was one of the first when the purchase of the tests came from South Korea. He looked at the not the shipping manifest, but he was the first one to explain to a lot of us that the tests were incomplete. I mean, he took the time to do the research and homework, and so I'm sympathetic, and I'm not sure what the simple. I don't want to make it so onerous. This is not like a gotcha to them, although they deserve a gotcha. So I just don't know what, I'm trying to give one to DGS, but hopefully if we see a big expenditure that we'll be able to do the audit, and the audit could include looking at the whole contract. And
I assume you can ask for that. If the LPC feels like they have a need to see the full contract, I presume the LPC could request it from DGS, right?
Maybe we should say that if the LPC requests an audit, it shall include the contract. It shall include a review of the full contract. Do we need to do that or not? Or is that assumed?
Do you already have the authority? I think they would already have the authority if they were doing the audit. I guess maybe I think the point that you may be trying to get at is that the LPC can request the full contract and DGS would provide it if requested. But other than that, the default is to not have to provide the full contract. Is that?
I guess my question is, can in fact LPC request a full contract? Even though DGS is not required to hand it over to them, do they have the authority to ask for it, the full contract?
Well, I think the thought was to amend this amendment to say that upon request of the LPC, DGS would have to provide the full contract.
Well, is that assumed, or do we need to put that language in?
I don't know if that's assumed. I would suggest amending this amendment to do that.
I'm fine with it. I find that as friendly.
So the default is to not have to provide the contract, but if LPC says that they would like it, then DGS would have to provide it.
Okay. Ms. Morton, we have that? Yes. Senator Ellis?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure if this is the appropriate time to put another amendment in. Do you have to deal with those on the floor first?
Objection. Is there any objection to the?
I want to say something about this one.
Okay.
We're still on this amendment, right?
Yeah, in a new form.
In a new form, right, with the Lamb amendment to the amendment. I just wonder, the name of the vendor, Jones and Son. I mean, there can be some pretty generic, common names of vendors. So I wonder whether, and I don't want to get into the weeds on this, I know you hate that, Mr. Chairman, but name and address of the vendor, name and the website of the vendor, something just to make sure that we're looking at the right vendor and not going down a rabbit hole.
I have no objection.
Ms. Morton, is there if you have thoughts, I just want to make sure that people are researching the right one as they're doing their background checks or looking for their history. Colleagues, do you have any thoughts on this? I just think we ought to get clarity. Also, for anyone who's watching who's confused, DGS is the Department of General Services, and LPC is the Legislative Policy Committee. Since we are devolving into acronyms.
I'm going to speak very briefly. I mean, you know, the Blue Flame situation, it was incorporated like a week before, and I don't know if they had a website or they had an address. Some people thought it was a quick shuffle going on. So I have no objection to that. I think I had Senator Carrozza followed by Senator Lamb, or Carrozza, Gallion, and Lamb.
What's before us right now? We had the Senator Pinsky's amendments about, I guess, making it a may request on the audit.
We haven't adopted either. There are two amendments.
So we talked about those, but this DGS one, it came in at a certain, I know we're amending now the DGS amendment. Where is the DGS amendment?
Page 2, line 18. It's a single sheet of paper.
Is it in the packet?
It's on your desk. It's on your desk. It's number 9814139.
It says, strike a copy of the procurement contract and substitute the name of the vendor and the dollar value of the contract.
So DGS came in with this, and now we have two amendments to this amendment? Is that where we are? Well, what are they? I'm just trying to catch up.
So,
The amendment on page 71, I don't think there's been any discussion or controversy. It says they have to report to LPC. Any objection to that amendment? Seeing none, that's adopted. The DGS Pinsky amendment is on the floor, and there have been two suggestions to amend the amendment. Senator Lamb has suggested we make it explicitly clear LPC can request the contract. That's one amendment, and we'll have to take one at a time. And Senator Kagan has said, where it says the name of the vendor, we should put in website and or address or something like that. So let's deal with Senator Lamb's amendment first, just to get him out of the way. Yes.
The DGS amendment, that now we have two potential amendments to that amendment. It sounds like before those, we had DGS kind of on board, something that was doable for them. My question is, if we change the amendment with those two things, would they still be good with it? Or does it change it enough that they're going to say, wow, this might be too difficult? I'm not, I mean, you're talking about different abbreviation stuff. I'm not familiar with that. So would those potential amendments to the amendments negatively affect or kind of go against the whole premise of DGS being on board with this now?
Well, first of all, I don't think they care about Senator Kagan's. They are
As brilliant as it is.
Huh?
As brilliant as it
Right.
is.
Their concern was submitting the whole contract and having to walk through it and blacking out names, dates, deliverables, who knows what. They didn't want to do that for any contracts that were submitted to LPC. So might they not be happy that we're putting language in that said if LPC wants to see the contract, they can? I don't know. I can't speak for them. Senator Lamb?
No, I can't speak for DGS either, but, but
You're on their most favored list either.
probably not. But I think it doesn't, at least from my perspective, change the posture all that much, right? The default is to still not have to provide the contract, which is what they were suggesting in this amendment. It's just that if the LPC, the Legislative Policy Committee, desires the amendment, desires the contract, the amendment to this amendment allows the Legislative Policy Committee to have the authority to have a copy of that contract. But the default is they don't need to provide it, which is what their current posture is with this amendment.
Let's do what is the non-controversial one. Great, however it is. On the Pinsky amendment, where it says the name of the vendor and the dollar value, the name of the vendor, website and incorporation address. Any objection to that?
Can I have a suggestion to add? Could we add the scope of work also? Because that's actually how you're able to assess what they're doing. So the name, address, website, scope of work.
Well, the rest of the bill says a description of how the funds are to be used and an explanation of the reasons that procurement is necessary to prepare for or address the emergency.
So that's included in the report to LPC?
That's in the,
Okay.
yes,
Okay.
That's in the bill.
Okay, never mind.
Okay. Any objection to the website and address? Okay, that's decided. So now the question before us on the amended amendment is Senator Lamb's proposal to include or upon request by LPC. That's the concept. That's not the language. We'll leave that to the bill drafter. So any discussion or debate on that? Senator Carrozza.
We haven't had the opportunity to check with DGS. I'm trying to get a quick read, but one of the points that I think we need to factor in is the whole thing about the timing and the redacting. If a contract has to be redacted and they're dealing with that during an emergency, so I think that's something that we should have discussed before we had an amendment to the amendment.
Well, if I could, and I'll call you in, Senator. The bill on page 2 says within 72 hours of the execution of the contract, written notice shall go to LPC. And we're saying in that 72 hours, they don't have to give the contract in 72 hours. They now just have to give the name of the vendor, their address, how much, and then the other two items. I believe what I hear from Senator Lamb is subsequent to that, not limited by the 72 hours. It can only happen after the LPC receives it, that they can ask for more information and data. So I don't think they're under the 72-hour restriction in Section 2. Senator Lamb?
Add to that, at that point, the contract will have already been executed. So this is not to hold up the contract at all. This is just for accountability and transparency after the fact. The default is that they don't need to provide that contract. If the LPC meets, convenes, and decide that they want a copy of that contract, then the LPC, which I assume is probably pretty rare, that the LPC can then take a vote to request a full copy of the contract with the proper sections redacted. And at that point, the contract's already executed. So even with the Board of Public Works, when they report this information to the Board of Public Works, the contract's already executed. They've already proceeded with everything. It's not slowing anything down in terms of being able to respond.
Okay. Further discussion on the Lamb amendment. Seeing none, all those in favor of the amendment signify by raising your hand. I count 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Those opposed? Okay. The Lamb amendment is adopted. Senate Bill 780 with the 3 amendments. Will anybody be voting against it?
I have a possible amendment.
I'm
sorry, I have a possible amendment. So we're done with the amendments now, right? So
Yes,
could I offer another amendment to this bill?
absolutely. It's your prerogative.
You shook your head, absolutely. No, okay. Body language, Mr. Chairman, okay.
I apologize. It's been a long day.
I know.
Been under the spotlight a little bit.
I know. This bill deal with procurement, emergency procurement. There are 2 bills that we had hearings on dealing with emergency procurement and the minority business enterprise, small business, federal participation. So I'd like to offer an amendment to make emergency procurement subject to the SVMBE goals. Small business, women-owned, veterans, minority business enterprise goals. Because right now they're exempt from that.
Thank you. Good intention, but I think it's the wrong place. These are for emergency contracts. This is for short time frames. I presume that the normal course of identifying, notifying, getting bids back, certifying the bids take a period of time. These are for emergency procurements. I'll be very supportive of any other normal routine purchases, but I think this is being cut out for a very specific reason. And as the amendments we're talking about, the transparency is after the fact. To put more obstacles in the way of issuing emergency contracts, I think is not intuitive.
Senator, I think I appreciate, I agree with what you're saying. I don't know if this is the vehicle. I'd actually like us to look at Lamb's bill, if you're talking about, and maybe add some of those things in there. But I definitely hear that there is an issue about defining what is and is not an emergency that I think can address some of those issues. So I'm just not sure if this is the.
Yeah. And
But
so,
you can convince me. I mean.
well, yeah, there is Senator Lamb's bill, and I presented a bill also with this. You know, if you look at the issues that brought this bill forward, the governor went all the way to Korea and to get incomplete test kits. And then with the Blue Flame, Blue Night, whatever, you know, this thing just popped up, and you know, we need, emergency doesn't mean that it should be a snap thing or let's do it now and rush and do it wrong. If we do it right, if we look at Maryland small businesses, Maryland minority businesses, and go through the process, they are nimble businesses. Many of them are nimble. They have the product, they have the services. So just to be excluded when they call it an emergency, I believe it does a disservice to the great small businesses, women-owned businesses, veteran-owned businesses in Maryland. And it's just shown from the testimony we had on the 2 bills, the Lamb bill and my bill, that these businesses are just ignored and not looked at when it's an emergency. Like, hey, we have to go outside of Maryland. We have to go outside of the great small businesses we have in Maryland, and veteran-owned business, and minority-owned business, and women-owned business, if it's an emergency. I mean, I think that we can do better, and we can include those folks in emergency procurement and get a better product. Thank you.
New discussion. Senator Washington?
I'm trying to think of where we would do it on this vehicle. So it's not, for me, it's not whether we do it, it's how how we do it and where we do it. So I do think we have to make that statement somewhere that just calling something an emergency does not exempt from our minority goals. I think that that's correct. So I'm wondering, I don't know if council or where it would go, but are you thinking that it's on page 4? And of course, the sponsor would have to be okay, but there's a line where it says the governor may not suspend the effect of this section. And so it's sort of saying the governor may not do X, Y, and Z. Is that what you're contemplating? Is that where you want to put it, or?
No, it's more complicated than
Yeah,
that.
that's
So
what I'm
this
thinking.
is, if we were to do these amendments, I mean, unless you have a very clear sort of something that you want, we would need to go back and work on a additional language.
Yeah, because that's, and
Ready to go, unless you have something specific that you're requesting. I mean, conceptually, there's a lot that goes into the way the minority business enterprise program generally works with contracts is a lot of it happens on the back end. A lot of it has to do with the subcontracting. So you essentially, they enter into a contract, they choose their prime contractor based off of, whatever source selection process that they're using, and then usually in negotiating with the prime, that's when they set minority business enterprise goals, participation goals and sub-goals for that contract. So it's not it's not as simple as just saying you can't exempt these contracts from minority business participation, because you have to figure out how minority business participation processes would work in the context of an emergency procurement contract.
Yeah, I'm going to call myself for a moment. At least the genesis for this bill was transparency of actions during emergency period of time. It didn't delve into the contracts, how they're selected. And I have to say, Senator, I don't know all the implications of what it would be if we had some emergency that had shortness of time. I just don't know. And, there are a number of bills on procurement, which we haven't gotten to yet. But this was not trying to address stopping or telling them how to do it. I wasn't happy, obviously, with some things that happened this summer or last spring. But this was the first step of transparency. There may be value in us addressing minority procurement as vis-a-vis emergency procurement. I'm just not sure this is the right vehicle or the right bill. So, that's my view, that's all. Other debate, Senator?
I understand that, sir. So, the Senate President is announcing, you talk about all the bills that are backed up, all these bills won't be heard. I've gotten so many calls and emails from Maryland small business folks saying, why are we being left out of all these procurement? They're not even looking at us because they don't have to. And so maybe we can put in maybe a recommendation, maybe instead of requirement, that the governor look at these businesses when awarding these contracts. So, to put it in the language. So that's amend my amendment to say the governor look into using these small MBEs for these emergency procurement. It's a big issue in the state. Our business owners feel really left out, and I believe that these bills will not get really a vote and move through the process because of things backed up. So I was just hoping this bill could be a vehicle to move that very important issue for our small businesses in Maryland. So subject to the will of the body. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
How do we proceed? Okay, the Senator's amendment, those in favor of Senator Ellis' amendment signify by raising your hand. Those opposed? I see not a whole lot of hands. I think I counted 1 to 5, 1 in favor, 5 against, and some not raised hands. The amendment does not pass. The bill's amended. Other amendments? Those who will be voting against the Bill 780, raise your hand or throw a red light. Okay, then this bill will be shown as unanimous and reported to the floor. How we doing on time? Let's try to knock out a few more. Let's go to the next bill.
We did 785
We did 785 earlier today.
Let's reconsider it.
804, please.
Senate Bill 804, Garrett County Memorial Hospital Board membership in meetings. This is sponsored by Senator Edwards. This bill alters the composition of the Garrett County Memorial Hospital Board of Governors and alters membership terms.
Local bill, any objection? Unanimous. Next.
That's mine.
Next, please.
Senate Bill 823, Cecil County Board of Education member terms and compensation. This bill. Okay. You want me to read or no?
This isn't the one. Put your mic on, please. Senator, put your mic on.
The Cecil Board of Education right now are term limited to 2. This will allow them to serve 3 terms. So instead of 8 years on the board, you could do 12. And it was supported by, we didn't have any opposition that I know of.
Objection.
So next is another local bill. This is Frederick County Board of Education vacancies. So the bill establishes an exception to the general requirement that an individual appointed to fill a vacancy on the Frederick County Board of Education serves for a remainder of the term. Under the bill, if a vacancy for an elected member occurs more than 30 days before the candidate registration deadline for the next primary election, following the vacating member's election, the individual appointed serves only until a successor is elected and qualifies at the next general election. Wait, no, sorry, sir. There's an amendment. It changes it pretty substantially. So they establish a fairly complicated process for filling the vacancy, where first the county executive appoints an individual to fill it if the vacancy occurs 30 days or less before the candidate registration deadline for the next primary election. However, if the vacancy occurs more than 30 days before this same deadline, the county executive appoints an individual to temporarily fill the vacancy until another individual is elected at the next election to serve for the remainder of the term.
Is the letter before the amendment or after the amendment? There's a letter. Okay, so they endorsed the bill with the amendment.
Correct. They came up with this, yes.
Any objection?
I have a question.
Sure.
Is there any precedent? Does any other county have anything like this?
No, this is absolutely new.
So, yes, it's a local bill, but this is I don't care what the story, I don't play that. And frankly, it's a Republican senator, and right now I think there's a Democratic county executive. So it doesn't feel partisan to me.
She endorsed the bill with the amendments, yeah.
That's fine. That doesn't necessarily mean that we have to totally go along with it if it's new behavior, new process for everywhere in the state that could follow this. So what is the status? Do you happen to know, Stacy, the status of I think it's a David Moon bill on members of the General Assembly and if there are vacancies? Because this is even different from that.
Right, so 655 is something that we'll be hearing next week. And essentially, from what I understand, and I have not studied this closely, is that bill would prohibit at-large election of members from at-large on county boards of education and county commissioners. That's 655.
That was the big debate on the floor, and the Wilkins Amendment on school board.
But there are two other bills
Okay.
that are affected by that same question, that we actually have two of those in our,
Should we be looking at these as a package in the same way that we look at cybersecurity as a package?
yeah, I think this is different.
This was not
Senator.
considered because these aren't at-large requirements.
But it's about vacancies. We have a Peters bill that was about vacancies. We have a General Assembly thing about how early in a term and whether it's central committee
Right.
or
So the-
special election.
The Senator Peters bill only dealt with municipalities and their charters, which is totally different than a county board of education.
I totally understand that. I get that. But in terms of vacancies and how we're filling them, I don't know if we care whether we're doing things consistently or not, or if everybody does them differently and we don't mind a patchwork quilt.
Yeah.
Maybe Senator Patterson has some thoughts.
Well, let me just say, there are a couple of bills that deal with electing people at large or by district. There was the bill that was controversial on the floor of the House, and I think we have two bills that touch on the same topic. And I guess I would separate that issue, which is a very important issue, from short-term appointments to vacancies. I know in our county, the county executive, on an appointed position, someone leaves, can do it with the approval of the county council, somewhat like this. So I think some can stand on their own, some should be looked at together. Senator Patterson.
I don't know. I was happy and ready to suggest we move forward with the bill until we got all these other steps added on. And I noticed a local bill, but is there any way we can just accept the first part and delete the second part of this bill?
We'll come back to it. Next bill.
Senate Bill 886, Transfer with Success Act. This bill requires the Maryland Higher Education Commission to require a receiving public institution of higher education that denies the transfer of a credit or course to an enrolled student to notify the sending public institution and the enrolled student as specified, including the rationale for the denial. The transfer coordinator or institutional designee of the sending institution must conduct a review in conjunction with the receiving institution's designee within a time period MHEC determines to be appropriate. Each public institution of higher education must submit an annual report to MHEC listing any denials of transfer of credit or a course and the reasons for the denial. There is one amendment in your packet. It's on the very last page from the sponsor, Senator Elfreth, and this amendment requires a receiving institution that denies the transfer credit to notify the sending institution about the denial within the time that the commission determines to be the latest rather than the earliest possible time for notification. And this amendment would conform the bill to the version passed by the House.
Okay, I think this had support from USM. Oh, no, I'm sorry. It does. USM, MAC, and others. So I think this is somewhat of a consensus. It's not, it avoided some of the more controversial approaches, which at some point we're going to have to address.
USM was informational. No, USM was in support, but I got additional follow-up. After a meeting? Yes.
Okay. It's moved and seconded to move the bill to the floor. Any discussion? Any discussion? Anybody voting? Yeah. The genesis is of setting up a common number system. So wherever you transfer, if it's 101, geology 101, it's the same geology somewhere else. There are some of the institutions that don't quite feel comfortable accepting some credits from some institutions, particularly two-year institutions. So some states have moved towards a common number. Many students were rejected. So this is a step to gather data to prepare us for further action. Senator.
My granddaughter started at Salisbury after one semester, went to the community college, and in September is going to Towson. We would expect all those credits to move up. This is a good bill.
Okay. Well, that's a pretty strong endorsement. I don't see any red lights on, so that passes unanimously, and we'll go to the floor. 901.
Senate Bill 901, Public Safety, Emergency Management, Resilient Maryland Revolving Loan Fund. This bill establishes the Resilient Maryland Revolving Loan Fund within the Maryland Emergency Management Agency. The Revolving Loan Fund is a special non-lapsing fund with the stated purpose of providing loans for local resilience projects that address mitigation of all hazards, including natural disasters, for fiscal 2023 and each fiscal year thereafter. The governor must include in the annual budget bill an appropriation of $5 million for the fund. There is an amendment coming around being offered by the bill sponsor, Senator Hester. Essentially what this would do, and I think I may have actually just given, Senator Lamb my notes, would allow general obligation bond funds authorized by the state capital budget to be included in the fund and increase mandatory appropriations to at least $10 million from the state operating or capital budget bill.
Let's put it on the floor. It's been moved, seconded. Senator Riley.
April, could you remind the committee and the people watching, I know there's a lot of people watching, what does resiliency mean? What is this resilient Maryland? What's resiliency? What are we trying to get at?
So this is dealing largely with climate resiliency, So the natural and larger and more broadly to the ability to recover from natural disasters.
Yeah, thank you so much. So this revolving loan fund is specifically designed so that we can tap into the Federal Storm Act, which speaks to resiliency more broadly. In Maryland, at least prior to the pandemic, our risk register said that flooding was our number one risk for the state of Maryland. So the Storm Act provides a 90% match for revolving loan funds established with these criteria. So if we put in $10 million, we could get $90 million from the federal government to capitalize this fund. If I could just speak briefly to the amendment also. It's gone a little bit above my head. If you might remember that my lead sponsor was the treasurer, and in her insight, she suggested moving it out of the operating budget into the ability to bond on the capital side. And I believe she and the chair of budget and she and the chair of the capital subcommittee of budget and tax are talking about the possibility of bonding for this specific purpose. So that is the reason for the amendment.
It still calls for a mandatory appropriation in next year's budget.
It does, and I think they're still talking about this in B&T. And so I think the critical thing is that we make sure that it can be capital budgets. And then they can sort out the exact amount in budget and tax. That would be my, I'm not quite sure how to do that, but that would be my preferred mode to go ahead.
Okay, well, look, this falls under the category, excuse me, budget and tax has a formal second. They're writing the checks and they're the ones making a commitment to next year's budget and the year after. So they will judge. I mean, I think the concept of leveraging federal money obviously is a great one. We don't write the checks or pass the budget. So they will be looking at whether they put in the $5 or $10 million, and they may say yay or nay or some other number. And they'll send it back to us, either with a thumbs up or thumbs down or some more amendments. So the question for us is the policy side of this. please.
I have 3 questions for the sponsor of the bill, if I could. First, can you explain why, if it goes into effect, the bill goes into effect October of this year, why there is such a paltry fiscal note for FY22? You want me to ask all 3 questions at once?
Yes, sure.
Okay. Second, does MEMA support this, and do they say they have the capacity to manage this? And third is, are there expenditures and priorities going to be disclosed in any place? So that they, they're all about, I'm making this up, obviously, Ellicott City, and they don't think that Annapolis is so important or something. What sort of accountability would there be for this taxpayer money?
Answer the question on why the fiscal note is low for this year. It's because the mandatory appropriation doesn't kick in until fiscal year 2023.
Thank you very much for the question, Senator Kagan, Vice Chair. MEMA is wild about this bill. They think it's going to allow them to do both the small local projects that have to do with flooding and overflow when that happens. So they're very appreciative. I think they were consulted, and there's an extra pin in here for them to hire one person to work on this.
And PIN reflects a person, a state employee.
Thank you very much, Senator.
Yeah.
And the third question was about the reporting or the accountability.
Yes.
So this would be similar to our water quality revolving loan fund. And I would imagine the same rules would apply, but I don't know if our council could help to tell us how that works.
I don't know if there's federal kind of, I know the bill is set up so that it kind of ties into this federal program. And there's language in the bill that says that they have to grant loans to local jurisdictions, at least in part to meet federal matching requirements. So I'm sure there are going to be federal requirements for how those grants are issued. In terms of reporting, there's nothing specific in the bill. I don't know with the drinking water quality loan, what the revolving loan, what the reporting requirements, if any, are for that. So.
To a reporting amendment if one is required. I think transparency is good. I'd really like to vote this to Budget and Tax, and maybe we could offer that amendment in Budget and Tax.
I'm not looking to slow down at all, and Ms. Morton, I don't know if, like as we did last week, if there's boilerplate language, and I'm not looking for enormous reports or super frequently, but just some transparency, some accountability. So I leave it to you guys to consider that.
Move an amendment, or you don't want to move an amendment?
Senator Hester, if you're okay with this, I would say starting in FY, 23, Ms. Morton? Or FY 24?
Let's come to a decision. I want to bring this to a close.
Ms. Morton is coming up, so I will start the conversation, and then she can change the year. FY23 report to the relevant committees, which would be EHE and Budget and Taxation, and then the relevant House committees, as to the applications and expenditures, the revenues and expenditures, or on this issue. And Senator Hester, if you think this would be better done in Budget and Taxation Committee and do it more thoughtfully and not by the seat of our pants, and we get this started.
Okay, we have plenty of friends up there. You can speak to one of the senators, and they'll just do it up there. Okay, the bill as amended, discussion. Seeing none, will anybody be voting against it? Okay, then we will mark the revolving loan fund as unanimous and take it to the floor.
B&T.
To that floor above us. Okay, we're going to stop here, folks. We put enough time in. We ought to breathe and go to our own office or get some fresh air. We have about 2, 4, 6 bills. Shouldn't take long. We're going to try to take them tomorrow after bill hearings. Hopefully, we can do it in an hour. I don't know how long hearings are going to take, and you will get another list on tomorrow for Friday. Let me just make one final comment. A couple times tonight, Senator Ellis came up with an amendment about putting it on the website when on the was there an audiologist? And Senator Lamb came up with one about the Baltimore City situation to flip that around of understanding it's a state issue. I just want to tell you, I appreciate us thinking quickly and outside the box and being creative. So I want people, if you feel something in your gut, feel free to make it. And if it's more confusing and we can't do it conceptually, we'll have to hold it. But I think that's what makes a better product. If people are thoughtful, whenever they come up with it, we prefer amendments beforehand. But if it happens on the run, that's fine too. So I want to thank you for all your work. We'll continue tomorrow. Thank you.